noticing it. And with that, the doctors are feeling a big change. 30 something years ago, or whatever the number of years ago, when Invisalign first came out, some doctors ignored what was happening. And now look at where Invisalign is today. And the same thing happened with the scanners. There's a new buzzword in the industry that the orthodontists live by, and that's called airway. Not that airway didn't exist before, but it's the new buzzword. And we didn't want to ignore airway. And so if you don't know enough about airway, um, become more acquainted with it, because the doctors that aren't treating with traditional bands and braces and brackets, they're turning to the airway, and they're treating younger and younger. I've treated a patient as young as 5 years old. I've made an RPE and put an appliance in, and I think that they might justify that, or talk a little bit about that. So this is the purpose of this conversation, is to make sure that we're familiar with what is happening in the industry. So we have somebody coming in, which is Phil and Megan from Perfect Finish, and they work closely with a doctor who does a lot of airway. And so we'll turn that time over to them. Become familiar with airway and make sure that you spend a little time understanding it, because it's not going away, I promise. So with that.
Okay, good morning, everybody. But before Megan and I get started, I think we haven't had this before yet. A sponsor come in, because like Lance said earlier, it's super important, because they're helping us be here by helping paying for the booths, and this all costs money. So Dentorum we also use, and coincidentally, I reached out to Hugh before we started this, because one of the systems we're going to talk about today, Dentorum manufactures. So we just thought it was smart to just have him. We're going to introduce 4 systems, but he's going to talk briefly, I think, about the company. He's got 10 minutes. So I told him it's a commercial, to introduce himself to everybody and talk about their system. And then, of course, hopefully you'll stop by and see him if you haven't already when you head out to the floor. Okay, Hugh, take it away.
Right. Thank you, Phil. So some of you know me, some of you don't. I've been with Dentorum for almost 14 years. But what I'm going to do today is just kind of give a quick overview of Dentorum and some of the key products that we're known for, that we're able to supply directly to the orthodontic labs. Dentorum has been around for quite a while, since 1886. We are in our 4th generation as a family-owned company located in the Black Forest region of Germany, which is known for things such as high-end watches, high-end vehicles such as Audi, Mercedes-Benz, which coincidentally we also came out in 1886 as well. So we're known for the high quality. We're known worldwide. So we have our products on just about every continent. So we're international all over. And what makes us unique is we cater to, so we have a full line of orthodontic products. We have dental products. We make ceramics, implants. So we're able to create all of those high quality products in a wide array. So we're there for you. One of the key products that we are known for is our Thomas, which is our TAD system, which they're going to go through today regarding the MARPI and how this benefits. It's a complete system that provides things. So you have the surgical kit, which is where the orthodontist or the oral surgeon utilizes. You have an abutment kit and auxiliary kit, which you guys can use to be able to help fabricate appliances and things such as the eyelets that they're going to talk about to be able to manipulate directly with the RPEs. And then we're very well known for our RPEs, which are extremely high quality. They come in an array of different options for you. We have a 4-leg. We have a 2-leg. We have our new Neo that we're coming out with. With the 4-leg and the 2-leg, they're available in a click version, so a locking type mechanism. They're also available without the locking mechanism. And then they are in straight arms, and then the 4 legs is also available in slightly angulated. And then we also offer all of the options without legs as well for your SLM process. You guys are welcome to sign up. We're going to be having on October 14th a free webinar on the MARPI. This would be from the view of the orthodontist. So it's being taught by the orthodontist. That you can sign up, and if you want, there's a QR code or the website you can go directly to and directly register right there. It's about 45 minutes to an hour, and you'd be able to hear one directly from the doctor that helped create this with the eyelet, and directly from the viewpoint of the orthodontist. If you haven't had a chance to come by our booth, some of the things that we have presented there is, like I said, our new Neo screw, which the arms go perpendicular versus parallel. So if you come by, we can demonstrate how that works. And also the Romanium Star powder, which is it's the cobalt chromium powder for SLM. So if you haven't, definitely come by and we can demonstrate all of that. Another appliance that some of those components can be used for is our distalizing appliance called AMDA, Advanced Molar Distalizing Appliance. This particular appliance is usually done by the doctor chairside, but a number of doctors don't like to do any of that manipulation, so they have the labs create it for them. You can get all of this directly from us. You can get it as a complete kit, or we do have all the individual components, and a number of the labs utilize those pistons with the coil spring inside for additional appliances. So you can use those for other things, not just for the AMDA. We're also known for our Herbst. We have several different models of the Herbst. This one you see here is our telescoping Herbst, which is also available in multiple sizes. Our acrylic is also available in multiple options. Standard salt and pepper technique, which you guys do on a daily basis. We have our black and white, but then also we have an option called our Ortho LC, which is a light cure acrylic. Great for appliances, but also great for fixing. So if you have a mild crack or they send back to you, you can use this to help repair that. Quick and easy. A lot of labs like to use our bands because of the many size options and the type of the size and types of temper that you can get with ours. So we have several different options for you as well. Some of you yesterday saw Steve working with our wire and some of our instruments. Extremely high quality. We back all of our product, especially our instruments. They carry a 10-year warranty. So you know that they're going to last and work. And lastly, you also had a chance to see, how many of you guys had a chance to see Steve? Okay, so you saw the versatility of the welder. If you are at all interested, if some of you don't have that welder, we are going to have a promotion here. So if you get a chance, come by the booth and we can discuss that there. But you saw how versatile it is. It's not just one option. You can do multiple things with it. And you can see the quality. Number of labs, I think Steve in general, he's had his for well over 20 years and it still lasts. You just find a way to keep growing and getting more. So as you can see, thank you for your time. Dentorum is, extremely happy to be here. To have Phil talk about our the MARPI concept, utilizing the eyelets, our RPEs. So if any questions, please definitely come by and see me at the booth. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Did he leave? Did you leave? Oh, I'll get it to him later. He left his flash drive. That's great. It's from my boat. They're asking me to update my Garmin for my we don't need that right now. That's awesome though. It's good to know.
Did you ask?
No, I was looking for Hugh because he left his flash drive here from Denture. He split. But thanks for being present. Well, most of you met me yesterday. I'm Phil from Perfect Finish. Not sure if there's any new faces. What did I say? Would you tell me yesterday? 23 person we are? I'd check with Megan to know how many people we are now. You know, it could change on a day, right? We're a 23 person laboratory in New Jersey. All right, we're going to use this Mike's clicker. See if this works. We got into this about, I guess, 4 years ago. Because like most things that you haven't done before, you get a call from a doctor. They say, hey, can you make a TAT-assisted expander? Do you make them? No, but we'll figure it out, right? We had never done it at the time 4 years ago. I'd heard about it, but I didn't know enough about them. So I don't make any. I've never made a one. That's why she's here. She makes them all. She's made hundreds. So I'll let Megan introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Megan. I started working at Perfect Finish over 20 years ago. I started in the trimming department. I did that for a few years, then did some wire bending. Then I started up our 3D department maybe 8 years ago now.
8 or 10 probably.
Yeah, 8 to 10 years ago. Now my current role is general manager. I'm also the vice president and a part owner. My days are mostly spent doing quality control. I still am at the bench doing all of our fixed expanders. And as Phil said, within the past 3-4 years, I started undertaking the TAT-assisted expanders. So my goal today is to hopefully give you guys the fabrication side of things and give you some tips and tricks that I've learned. I have made some mistakes, so hopefully I can share them with you guys so you don't make mistakes as well. And also answer any questions that you guys might have. So,
Okay. So we're going to kind of swap back and forth a little bit because I'm on the sales side of it. So we're going to get into maybe just some basics of it in the beginning. But Megan's going to handle, of course, like I said, you know, most of the fabrication stuff as far as hopefully helping you guys not make the mistakes that we did or she did, you know. So these two terms get thrown around a lot, MSC and MARPE. They're the same thing. You can use them interchangeably. At first, I didn't realize that because I thought the moon screw was just the MSC and I thought the MARPE was anything else. But they both mean the same thing as far as these appliances go. So you're welcome to use those words interchangeably. But why did we get here? So why the orthodontists got here is because we generally couldn't expand adults in the past. When we used RPEs on an adult, we just got a little bit of tipping of the teeth. And the TAT-assisted expander is actually getting some true expansion where in the past, maybe we had to do surgery on an adult, to get some palatal expansion. So, because now I see more and more adults coming into wanting orthodontics. It's a bigger part of the orthodontic practice. People are more aware. And some of the comments that I hear from some of my orthodontists and why some of these people are getting these MARPs is because it is an airway issue. Maybe they have sleep apnea. Also, a lot of women are getting them because it actually helps make them look younger. Talking to some of the doctors that we service, that's a cosmetic thing. Clearing up the bags under the eyes, skin's brighter. So there's a lot of things. There's more research that has to come out because they are relatively new, but there's a lot of reasons why that, like Lance was saying, this is becoming a buzzword now. Tatascitus expansion, airway now on younger people, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Most of the ones that you guys are familiar with is the Moon. We have a good amount of samples, and we have, of course, a lot of slides, but Megan's going to pass around some of the things that she has here in addition to some of her work. So you can see, I know it's a big group, but it'll eventually get around to all of you. So most of you are probably used to seeing this. This is the most common tatascitic expander that we're used to. And I think it's really because of the advertisement. There's Facebook groups. Dr. Moon has a Facebook group that he started that you can try to join. It's really a doctor's group, but he will allow some techs in it, MSc users group. And there's a lot of good information there. For a lab owner, I don't really comment, but I do like it helps me help diagnose cases and see what the orthodontists are looking for. But we're going to go over 4 different TAD support expanders today, but this is the most popular, the one we get the most. Again, because of all the research, the advertising, the promotion that he does, the promotion that some of the labs do that sell them. Great Lakes is a big seller of this particular screw, right? You're familiar with it. The most frequently used, it comes in different sizes. The most frequent is the 10, and the most frequent TAD size is an 11. Generally, when I think Megan has some kit components here, and this is important to note. If you have a doctor that's wanting to get into it, because that's generally what happens. We have a good amount of accounts that just aren't interested. And then we have some that are interested, but they don't have the components. So it's an initial high purchase. We do carry them for them if they want to buy them from us. If you buy some of these things if you're going to purchase from, like, say, Great Lakes, you can buy these things in bulk and get discounted pricing. If you need to buy the screws, you have to buy at least 10 of the TADs. Okay, yeah, you have to buy like 50 of the TADs, and the screws, I think you have to buy at least 10 at a time. So there is an investment, and of course, these starter kits are expensive, but they need to have these drivers, So you have, I think this has so you have the ratchet driver, okay? You have the mini driver. So both of these things, the ratchet driver or the mini driver, could assist one or the other, or both, if necessary, could assist in actually driving the TADs, all right? This has more torque, and this is a handheld thing. What I've heard from feedback from some of the doctors is the little mini driver can be a little bit more user-friendly because it's smaller. You'll see, do we have one that you're passing to? All right, cool. It's a little bit smaller. The tricky part is they have to kind of like hold the pressure on the thimble as they're turning it. What is also interesting to note is this short engine driver. See this little component right here? That is necessary. I didn't know that at first. I thought at first the TAD could fit right inside of the mini driver. It might, but it doesn't really do the job properly. So and this is a sales gimmick to me, but you can buy this. Why don't they sell that with it? I don't know. Yeah, but you don't buy because you can just buy this separately, but it's not going to do you any good unless you have this component. The ratchet driver comes with the head to hold the TAD. All right. but they can buy the whole starter kit to get started. And then if I guess they can send you the screw if they buy this whole kit, but then they'll have all the TADs. Additionally, after they make the initial purchase, then you can just get the refill kit. And again, we've purchased this for them, or they can just buy the TADs individually. I really don't want to get into the sale of TADs, but we provide it. Generally, once the account gets going, then they start buying those things on their own. But Megan will talk about this more later. There's a lot of hand holding. Maybe like Jamil was saying yesterday, with a new product, there is a lot of hand holding in the beginning because it's new. There's a lot of information. And it's just an understanding of how this all works and the equipment that you need. It does come with 2 different keys. Oops. It does come with 2 different keys. One's longer than the other. That's the only difference. Because it is to turn it under the force in the mouth. It is very powerful, so the wrench is necessary. Okay. The activation rate is kind of weird in my mind because it's a 6-sided shaped cylinder in the center for the hex nut. So when you go all the way around, it's 6 turns. But when you go all the way around for 6 turns, it's 0.8 millimeters of expansion. Doing the math, it's actually 7.5 turns, which is kind of wacky, to get 1 millimeter of expansion. It's important to know we're going to, did we pass those out already? The little flyer? With all the screws on it? All right, so you guys have a key with the different expansion rates already on there. I think what we're going to do is maybe Megan suggested it. Maybe after each system, we can either take a pause to see if you have questions after each of the systems of the 4, and then we can open it up more at the end if you want as well. And I can certainly share this with anybody, this PowerPoint, if you want to, because again, Megan's going to get into a totally different part of it. But that was just kind of some basic intro stuff about the components. Your turn. Megan's turn.
Okay, so from the fabrication point of view, sorry, from the fabrication point of view, thanks. It is different than a typical RPE. With the Moon Expander, you want to put the housing of the screw flat up against the pallet. It was a little weird to me at first because it goes against everything that I was taught about fabricating an RPE and impingement and everything else. So you want to try to get as close to the pallet as you can. You want it touching. You want it like flat up against it. The midlines lined up like you would with a normal RPE. You also want to make sure that the struts coming off of the screw, I leave them a little more than I typically would away from the pallet to avoid impingement there. Maybe 5 millimeters. So then, there's a few different options with, we have laser sintered bands. You could do traditional bands. It's very flexible with everything with the lingual arms, the placement of them as well. The expander comes in 8, 10, and 12 millimeter sizes. I very rarely am able to use a 12 millimeter just because of the narrow pallets. 10, as Phil said earlier, is probably the most common. Typically, the bands are placed on the first molars, 3D printed bands, whatever the doctor prefers. It's worth noting that the bands aren't as critical as they are on a normal RPE. They're not used for retention as much because the TADs themselves are the main source of retention on these appliances. The bands are typically used more to as a guide to help the doctor seat the appliance where it needs to be so that they can insert the TADs where they're needed to be. Also, the support legs on the MSE are very flexible. They're not as rigid as they are on a standard RPE. They can also be removed. I had a doctor call because a patient was in extreme discomfort. They were impinging on the tissue. So I advised her to cut them off because we do make another alternative version of this with no legs. And it worked. She called back a few weeks later and said everything worked fine. Thank goodness. But yeah, so once the TADs are inserted, you have all the anchorage that you really need. The bands aren't really super necessary, but most doctors, when they request it, that's what they get as a traditional RPE, the bands on the 6s and, with the legs. So as I was saying, we do this version for one doctor, gets this fairly regularly. It's just the housing of the MSE. I cut the legs off and I rubber wheel them just for patient comfort. I put a little tiny dab of glue on the underside, right on the housing, making sure not to get in the threading. And then the technician fabricates an Essex right over top for a transfer tray. When we're done, you want to make sure to see where the little eyelets are, like over scallop them out. One mistake I made was not doing it the first time, and the doctor said, yeah, it worked great, but when I went to go remove it, there wasn't enough room. So make sure you kind of over scallop around where the TADs are going to go so they can pop this in, insert the TADs, and then just remove the transfer tray. So it's a lot less invasive, no bands, no lingual arms, but it works just as well. It's just a regular 040 Essex material. Yeah.
And is there a distance like display or Acrylic that you like to, or is it just how it fits in the palette?
I mean, typically this one's back a little further than I normally would go, but the doctor had indicated where she wants it. I love when the doctors indicate it. I don't have to guess. Typically what I would go by is the distal legs here are lined up with the distal of the 6s. That's normally where I would place that, but she wanted it back further. So that's where I put it. Don't want to question that. So any other questions before I move on to the next expander? Okay. The transfer tray. You did that? Okay. Okay. So next up is the Denture Thomas system. Okay, thanks. The Denture Thomas system. This is a little more challenging to fabricate. It takes a lot more work to do it. The MSE is probably the Moon Expander is the most straightforward. As a technician, fabricating them is much simpler. You just pop it in and that's it. This kind of takes some back and forth work from the technician's point of view anyway. There are the plus side to these. The doctor can pretty much has a lot more flexibility with where the TADs can be placed. You can place the TADs as far anterior as you want, back as far distal. You could have one up higher, one down lower. So there is more flexibility. That is one plus. Yes?
Do you guys ever have doctors who want to place the TADs first before you fabricate the expander, or basically you dictating, where those, TADs are basically going to be placed by making the expander first?
Right. So there are others. There's one other system that we'll go over where the doctor can place the TADs first, but typically all of these are TAD last approaches. So we really would like the doctor to just dictate where they'd like to place them, whether it's through marking it on the cast or digitally. I'll show you what one account does for us that's super helpful, and I would much rather that. But yeah, most of these systems are TAD last. So, I mean, you want to make sure that you have good communication with the doctor too, so that you don't have to remake this. If they get it in and the TADs it's not placed where they want them, then it comes back and then it's a redo. Yeah.
The doctor wanted us to, make the RPE after he had placed the TADs, and he gave us, he was sending stone models, but we'd have them in the impression. It's what the hell are we supposed to do with this?
Yeah.
It's in the way, first off, but yeah. So I was wondering if you guys would deal with that at all, or would you just say no? These are all TAD last. Do that
Yeah. We
last.
pretty much just
Use this as a guide, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Anyone else?
I have a question. So
place like a blackout underneath the screw so when you vacuum former, it doesn't get all into the,
For the one
Screw
with the
itself.
transfer tray?
yeah.
No, we don't.
Just
Nope.
vacuum forming it.
Yeah, just vacuum forms right over top of it. Okay, so as I was saying, like with this system, here's one that we did that's the doctor sent me a picture in the patient's mouth. She used 4 TADs. I don't recommend doing this. It's very, very challenging to try to get all 4 to line up with path of insertion. That's another issue to consider when you're placing the lingual or the pilots. Thank you. So with this system, though, you don't get any impingement with the expander itself. This can stay up off the palate like, a normal one would, the traditional RPE. You just want those eyelets right up against the palate. So it's, you don't, if the doctor's concerned about the moon expander impinging, this is another alternative they can use. Again, there's, you can always add 4 like you would with the moon expander, but typically the 2 is the standard. That's normally what I would do. Something worth noting. I messed this up the first time I did it. There's a top and a bottom. I was so focused on like lining everything up perfectly that I didn't realize that. And the doctor called and was like, one's bigger than the other. I'm like, I just took everything out of the same baggie. I don't know what you're talking about. So then I looked and there's a top and a bottom. It's cone shaped to fit Dentorum's TADs. So I had to cut the one off and, flip it over and do it correctly. But you want to make sure the smaller side over here is flat up against the palate. And then the larger side is facing occlusally. And this works exclusively with Dentorum's TADs because they are also cone shaped. So it fits snugly in there. So another thing that I messed up, so just FYI, make note of that if you're going to be doing these. Here you can see I placed a moon TAD in here just to see how it would fit, if it could be used. And it's hard to see, but there is quite a bit of spacing here just because of the cone shaped. So again, I would strongly recommend using Dentorum's TADs with the Dentorum system. Where the moon expander, you can really use any TAD. The doctor has, their own preference of TADs, they can use them. Something else worth noting is that the moon housing is 1 millimeter thicker than Dentorum's. So if the doctor is trying to determine the length of TAD that they need, that's also something to take into consideration. You want to maximize the engagement in the cortical layers. So, you might need, if you're using the moon housing, you might need to use a longer TAD than you would, say, on the Dentorum system. It's also recommended to use something like the click from Dentorum when you're fabricating this type of appliance, just because there is so much force in these types of appliances. So you want to avoid any backing up. And also from a technician's point of view, the front legs here, it's the way the expander is fabricated. It's a lot easier to bend up around those eyelets than it is for like a Leone where it's kind of coming out of the side. So you'd have to kind of go all the way up around and tuck it in. Just another thing that I've noticed while fabricating these. So here I just wanted to show an example of, we have a doctor that gets the Thomas system pretty regularly, and she found a way she has the STL file for the TADs. So these weren't placed first. She's just dropping the file onto the digital scan of where she wants them. This is super helpful and my favorite way to do these, because then I can just simply slide the rings right over top and it's exactly where I know she wants them. If she was sending a plaster model, it would be easy for her to indicate, but digital, it kind of gets lost in translation where they want it to go. So this kind of solved that issue. Sure.
Is that printed on a model like that already? So you lay your screw right in there and fabricate from there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
So the eyelets are right on there on the model. I think. Do you want to pass it around?
Sorry. Yeah. We have the model sample so you can see it.
So what I typically do with this is I'll line it up. We do still duplicate the models and solder on plaster. So having the digital model, I line everything up on here and I hit it with the laser welder a few times just to get everything, super as accurate as I can. So I have just a little piece of Mortite to hold up the expander in place while I laser weld everything. So then I can take it off and I can kind of laser weld on the underside as well after that's done. Then I'll take a pair of headgear pliers or just a sturdy, flat nose plier, and you can kind of tweak it because, laser welding, it kind of throws things out of whack sometimes. So I can tweak it back down to where I need it to be. Then I do the framework with Denture system. They recommend putting occlusal rests on the Ds or the 4s, whatever's there. Here we used laser sintered bands on the molars. So I have everything lined up. This is on the plaster. You can see how there's, you can still see the spot where the TADs are going to be placed from the duplication process. So line everything up, get it ready to solder. Just some more views of it right before I solder everything. We solder it, we clean it up, and then we place it back on the digital model just for a double check. I do more tweaking. So it's a lot of back and forth and a lot of tweaking, as you can see, compared to like the Moon Expander, where it's very similar to a normal RPE fabrication of just putting it on there and you're done. So there is some back and forth with it. But that's it. Any questions on this?
How much of the circumference of the eyelet do you typically weld to the wire?
As much as I can. Usually I try to get at least half.
Okay.
And then I do the top, I take it off, I do the underside as well. Sometimes we will even solder over top.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, just for extra. If I can't really get a good weld on it for whatever reason, I'll fill the holes with plaster and then just solder
Okay.
on top.
Great. Thanks.
Yep. It's back there.
You mentioned earlier,
Oh, there's a question back
I've watched a couple of those seminars. I won't try to pronounce his name. It's Dr. A. Baumgartner. Thank you. He uses, I don't know how, he's probably done hundreds of these, maybe more. But it's really interesting because, again, like you said, it's from a doctor's perspective. But as a technician, you really learn a lot by listening to him, because he works super closely with his lab, which, as Megan's telling you, you really need to work really closely with your lab tech. And Megan's always told me, like, many times she's back and forth on the phone with these appliances, especially early on. A lot of questions.
Pictures.
Text and pictures. Yeah. She'll text a picture. How's this look? To the doctor, it looks like it's in the right spot. And we'll talk about that more later when we talk about the CBCT scans and everything else. But
there's a question back there.
Oh, go ahead.
I want to back up to the Moon Expander real quick. I was just told that those can be used on adult patients,
Yes.
and you may have said that already, and I didn't catch it. But kind of the question is that, I mean, and then what I also heard is that it goes ahead and sort of like splits the palatal suture again on an adult.
Yes, that's correct.
So, and I have a lot of, customers, not a lot, but every once in a while someone will go, hey man, I need, expansion on an adult. What do we do?
Mm-hmm.
And, so if that happens, do you have any time frame? This is to go back and, because, the doctor's then going to ask these questions. If it splits that palate, how long does it have to stay in there once it's where the expansion is in order for it to clean back up before you can pull it back out?
Do you know that?
That's a good question. That's about 6 to 8 months, I believe, from
Yeah.
hearing other orthodontists. It's a good question.
Great question. It's similar to your RPE. You have to retain it for at least 6 months afterwards. We didn't talk about this before, but a lot of orthodontists in the beginning are a little nervous, so they couple with an oral surgeon to help them originally maybe seat the TADs, and then after they get a little more comfortable, maybe they'll try it. Some orthodontists are fine. They go jump right into seating the TADs on the first go. Others still continually to use an oral surgeon to help them place them. I know I'm getting off track, but yeah, I listened to a couple different seminars. If you've heard of Mariana Evans, she's big into this field as well. She's at a UPenn, and she talks about expansion on adults, up to 65-year-old women. She's done it on, and got fantastic results. So, and she showed slide after slide of the X-rays, and the actual expansion that she's opening the nasal cavity. Amazing stuff. Changed lives for people that had severe sleep apnea for many, many years, and, completely changed their life.
What is their concern about, having, like even with children, if you get the, an expander too close to the palate, tissue growing up around it. So on an adult, having to keep it in that long. I mean, obviously we all know that it'll rebound, but what is do they have a lot of issues with that?
Yeah,
Because you got that one piece in there, so tight, and it being in there that long, do they have to cut it out, at the end, or?
Yeah, another great question. It's probably more for an orthodontist, but I know in asking some of those similar questions, they use these rinses. I know exactly what they're sure, like these perio rinses, pre and post and during, to help with the tissue. Similar to the questions you get when somebody asks you about a Haas, is it going to irritate the tissue, but generally it rebounds. But on an older person, yeah, it's a real concern. It's not going to rebound as quickly as a 13-year-old, right? The other interesting fact, I'm getting off track a little bit, but it's so interesting to me, some of this information in listening to Dr. Evans, is that it works on adults. It works, in her experience, it works a lot better on females. Generally, what she's saying, after males after 25, it's like a 50-50. But then I'm going to get into another system here of a Dr. Kawaya, who's out of Aruba. He's done over 500 systems, and he doesn't see that. He has a little bit of a different system, which I'll show you. And he says he gets really good results with males as well, adult males as well. So that's an argument for them to have, but it's an interesting point. And the way it was explained to me by her was that she feels that it's more a hormonal thing, that women have certain hormones, maybe estrogens, to help them with expanding their hips and different things for childbirth. And they have ways to rebound, and it stays longer in their system. Whereas a male's palate, once they get to like 20s, it just like a rock, it just hardens right up. It's all grizzle,
So replying a little bit to what Scott was just saying, the doctor can treat it just like he treats any other expansion appliance. If he wants to put a TPA for comfort, he can take the expander out and put a TPA for the 6 to 8 months. That option is up to the doctor. And the patient, if the patient is really uncomfortable, that option is there with a TPA, just to hold things. Anyone else has questions?
I have a little one. So we've done a couple of MSC screws and MSC expanders, and we've run into a few issues where the palate's so constricted that we can't get the MSC all the way to the bottom of the palate. And I was just wondering if you've run into those problems, because we feel really uncomfortable when a doctor tells us to just grind at the palate until it hits the bottom. And that has happened. We'll take a model to a doctor and have him grind on it because we don't want to, but he'll literally have us just destroy a patient's palate in order for him to get this to the bottom of to the top of his mouth. And have you run into any of those issues, or do you have solutions to that? Because
another great question, and Megan's going to get into that. We're going to have like a tips and tricks section, and she's going to talk about that. She has a lot of slides. It's a great question.
I also have a picture I can share where a doctor did exactly what you did, what you just said. He dug into the palate and he shoved the screw in there. We did it together, actually. And so I have a picture I can share with you.
Yeah, she has some slides on that. So is there any more questions on the Toma system? Okay. So this goes to Sam's point earlier. And I'm copying off of Dr. Evans here. The acrylic TAD supported expanders can be a TAD first approach. So the one on the left that you see was how we first got started. This was came out of UPenn and was a doctor that we have that worked there as an instructor like 4 years ago. And this is how we first started them. They were placing the TADs, and we were simply just using like a pop screw, a Leone pop screw, and creating an acrylic base, almost like a Haas without framework. And what they would do, and I'll show some more slides about it, I'm hoping it's clear enough, is they're using like a light cure acrylic as an additive around the TADs and attaching that to the sides of the expander. So, you know, right in here, they just kind of make a putty almost. And we kind of would leave this rough on the underside a little bit, so it's good for a good adhesion. The slide on the right is a TAD last approach of an acrylic supported expander. So there's a lot of different options, and I'm going to show another one. This one is a TAD first approach, but there's reservoirs underneath. So this was an actual case that Megan did. And you can see the TADs are in kind of weird spots, like one's all the way up here, one's over here. And so it, like Megan was mentioning, this system provides a lot of flexibility for TAD location. Whereas the moon screw, that's one of the detractors. It is dictated by the screw. The housings are on the screw. You can move it up or back a little bit, and that's it. The Thomas system, you have a lot of options. This probably gives you many options. You can use 2, 3, 4. I don't know. You can use as many as you want. Dr. Evans also talks about that. And generally, it's based on age. With adolescents, young people up to their 20s, she feels you can get away with 2. As you start getting older and adults, you might need more. 3, 4, especially with males, as we were indicating. You know, this is, I'm not sure how old this person is, well, they're at least teenagers. But so the reservoir, did you pass a sample? Oh, great. Sorry. Megan's passing a sample around because it's really hard to see on this slide. But basically, we just create a little bit of a reservoir here underneath for the head. You have to make sure you really over scallop those reservoirs for path of insertion. Because, you know, again, many of the TAD heads might be on like an angle. And if you just kind of try to get too cute and you just create a real narrow reservoir, the path of insertion might get hung up. So overdo it. It's not a big deal because, you know, they're just filling it with a light cure resin. And like I said, it's kind of hard to see it. All right, so this is a doctor sent us a picture. I know it's kind of hard to see it in this young girl's mouth. But, you know, she held it in there. I watched the video. I can share it with you guys another time. It's kind of long. It was like 15 minutes, but I tried to cut it down some. She actually kind of holds it in there. She has to have an assistant help her and hold the light gun. It's pretty neat. Very comfortable for the patient compared to like the moon. Don't have any wires. This became a little bit of an issue. As you know, Dentsply is starting to get out of business with making certain things. They stopped making Triad gel, and that was the go-to for that light cure resin for the TAD-assisted expanders. There's still some of it around because there was so much of it made. But Reliance has a product that substitutes. They picked up on that. Great company. It's just called TKO. I don't know what the acronym stands for. Maybe somebody does here. But in reaching out to them, it works really well. I think it comes in clear or pink, the TKO. I don't know that matters, but that's the good substitute for light curing these in the mouth. Yes.
Is it kind of similar in price? Does it come in like 4 vials? What is it? What does that do?
I have no idea about price. I know the Triad gel was relatively inexpensive because they used to sell it in these giant containers. The TKO just comes in this syringe style, so I'm guessing it's probably a little more expensive. But what I do like is with the Triad, it was almost like a toothpastey kind of tube, where this looks really focused and concentrated, and I can imagine less waste, you know. But I don't want to say how much because I don't know, but that's a good question. In certain cases, to a couple people's points, you know, there can be super narrow pallets. This was an actual case that we worked on. And the acrylic may be the only option. Although there's a new screw out that Megan's going to introduce you to that might work for this patient. But up until recently, the acrylic one was the only option for this gentleman. All right. And again, I mean, you can see the need, and I really feel great about being able to change this person's life. But the acrylic was the option, and it worked. Okay, so I think we're going to wrap up with the acrylic supported. So like I said, a lot of flexibility for placement. They can use doctor can use any TAD they want. TAD lengths generally can be shorter because you don't have to penetrate through the housings of the expander. Path of insertion issues, not so much, as long as you clear them out if you're using like a void. And these are really inexpensive to make. We don't charge a lot of money for these at all. And it's, you know, just popping a screw in there, some acrylic. So because the other systems I was showing before can be quite costly. So this is a good option. Is there questions about the acrylic TAD supported expansion system? All right, Megan.
Okay, so to address the question earlier and what Phil was just talking about the narrow palette, sometimes, you know, the smallest MSE, if that's what the doctor wants to do, it's 8 millimeters. That won't fit. You can't get it close enough. We did just start producing this expander from a Dr. Kawaya. It's his Marpy. So this comes in 9, 11, and 13 millimeter. So if you can utilize the 13 millimeter on a super narrow palette, that would be very ideal. So what this consists of is the expander. Again, the expander doesn't need to go right against the palette. It comes with 4 adjustable legs that slide into the housing of the screw. Here's the components that come there. So you can see they're just 4 separate in a baggie with the expander itself.
We're passing it around.
Yeah, there's a sample, and then there's the components, so you guys can check it all out. So this, again, allows a lot more flexibility with a narrow palette if the doctor doesn't want to do an acrylic. This is an option that's out there now. I think I just started doing these, so I've really only done a handful, not too many. But feedback has been good so far. So here's one that I got, super narrow palette. So trying to figure out how to fabricate this was a little tricky because I was, all right, do I put these in first? It was kind of wobbling all around. So I'm like, nope, I need like a starting point to work off of. So I really just fabricated the expander itself first and then worried about the legs at the end. So I lined everything up where I wanted it to go. You know, again, where the, you know, the distal legs would be at the distal of the 6s. You know, there's really no guidelines on lingual arms. So we just did our standard, which was right up to the 4s or the Ds, whatever's there. So I had this soldered, cleaned up, and then I got it back to work on inserting the legs. So I did 2 at a time. So I started on the distal legs first. I slid them into where I thought they needed to go now that I have the starting point of like placing the expander right on the model again. I went around the circumference of the top with the laser welder. And you can see there's like quite a bit sticking up here. So I take care of that at the end. So here's a top view of the distal 2. Then I'm doing the anterior ones, the more mesial ones. Same thing. This is sticking up quite a bit. This is down lower, so it looks kind of not too pretty right now. So once I get everything back on the model, everything's laser welded pretty securely. I take a stone wheel and I grind it down. Then I rubber wheel it. Then sometimes I'll go over it again with the laser welder just to clean it up a little bit. I also will hit the underside just to make sure it's in there good. So then on the right side, I have a picture here of everything, once it gets rubber wheeled down and laser welded. And then you can see the finished product looks a little nicer. And I have one going around if you want to take a look at it. But this works very well with the narrow pallet, and you can really get in there. So another alternative with using the larger size screw also, you can use, there's 9, 11, and 13 millimeters. So, you don't have to, give up getting good expansion just because it's a super narrow pallet. Any questions about that one?
So that's really important to know, like Megan said, is that, you always need the most expansion. Oh, I project pretty well, but you need the most expansion, right, for the most narrow pallets. So the Kawaya system allows you to use a 13 millimeter if you wanted to, and just drop those legs down. So it's very interesting.
There's questions in the back.
There's a couple people want you to go.
Who's the manufacturer?
Kawaya, it's out of Aruba. Well, we have his name on one of these slides.
It was on the first one.
It's on the page. I'm just wondering where you purchased.
You can Google. He has a shop.
Okay.
So if you Google him, find his little his office website, and he sells product. He sells the pads. Should I tell him about the pads? Or are you gonna tell him about that?
What? That he says you have to use them?
He says go. You tell him. It's pretty funny.
Megan, I got a question. On the previous few slides, I'm seeing the implants going really, really close to the midline. What is the standard of space you should have between the two anterior implants, tap plants? It just looks like
so
almost
this-
they're right on the midline.
Yeah, this is a little closer. So
will
this
they
is just
fail?
a sample that I was doing.
Okay, but even if you back up to your real cases, can you back up a few slides?
This one. Yeah, it's
Maybe-
still the same.
Right. It just looks like really tight. So is there a failure rate?
What she's saying is this case she fabricated as a sample.
Okay.
So you're making a good point. In a real case, you probably would have.
Yeah, and before I do it, this is one that I send pictures to the doctor to
Okay.
approve before I would get it laser welded. I
But
line everything up.
is there a millimeter standard you should have them apart, like 2, 2.5, or?
That's open to the doctor. Again, you're going to rely on your account for telling you where to put them.
Gotcha. Okay.
But you can see they are relatively close in the housing as well, similar to the moon.
Good question.
Jay, I think probably in this situation, you probably open that screw up a couple of turns, get those away from the midline. I think that might help out. But I think what I'm seeing here is a standard blue key to turn this.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So what are the thoughts about that? I mean, all my experience with MSE appliances are wrench experiences because they just bend
Right.
those keys. They cannot get the turns with the blue keys.
So that is a good point. And like I said, I only did a few for one doctor so far of these. So I don't really have any feedback on that yet, if that's an issue or not, because she was also just trying this too. It was her first cases. So I'm not sure.
I'll answer to that. So, because the first time I got introduced to this was last year at NYU, because he lectured there to all the residents and the attendings, and that question came up. And the guy's he's pretty strong about his product in that he's done over 500 of these cases, and he just uses that safety key. It's the mechanics of it he feels really comfortable with. I would suggest Leone makes a great key for that too. It's a little stiffer. If you have a concern, that might be something, because I thought about that, maybe offering that just to our clients as a gimme, because it provides a little bit more stiffness to that key. We just have to make sure that the key actually fits in the hole properly, because I know that that metal part of it on the Leone is a little bit heavier too. Okay, so there's some good questions, and this is all part of it. But all I know is this gentleman actually also has a Facebook group that you can probably sign up for. Is it MSc in Biomechanics? MSc in Biomechanics. He has like 1,100 followers. I think he'll let the text jump on pretty quick, so you can ask a lot of these questions. It's good stuff. But he does a lot of lecturing too, so it might be interesting to jump on one of his. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases he keeps showing. Been very successful. There's only 3 orthodontists in Aruba, and he's the only one that does this. So, and he the way he explained it to me is similar to when I was talking in the beginning. There's a lot of Latino women, and they come to him for the cosmetic work of it, not necessarily orthodontics. They might need some orthodontics, but they want to look younger. And he has a lot of success with it. So it's a different philosophy, but it's been very successful.
So we've been using regular keys with our MRPs and never had a single problem. And we've been doing about 5 a week. What we've done as well in a similar thing, we started making these from a doctor from UCLA, and we actually just take cantilever wire and drop it down and add in a 2 millimeter shim, just an AO shim. And then you can get the space that you need as far as the distances to left and right. One thing I also recommend too is we just snap a photo to the doctor and make sure they like the placement before they actually solder and weld the appliance shut. Like that's worth a, yeah. Cantilever arms from a Herbst, because they can take that lateral force, and we weld and solder. If you don't weld and solder, they'll come right off. And then you need to use like there's like these thicker shims for the eyelets. We use some smaller ones, but we were having issues with them breaking off. So you've got to have enough metal on there to get a good cohesion. And we still weld and solder both things. So.
Side thing of just what your finished is. So yeah, because trying to conceptualize it in my head, I'm not very good at that. So, or sure, yeah, thank you. Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So next, I'm going to get into just a few tips and tricks that I've learned. Some I might have like went over a little bit already, but big one that we keep reiterating: communication is key with your doctors. If you can get a cell phone from them, that's like the best. Text them pictures directly, or an email that they check regularly, so you're not sitting waiting on something. I do always try, except for the moon expander, that's pretty straightforward, but all the other ones where I'm lining things up and trying to place them, I do get their approval first before I go ahead with anything and finalize anything, so I can make any adjustments necessary, because a lot of these appliances are pretty pricey, and if they have an oral surgeon lined up, it can be a whole big ordeal if something isn't right or not where they want it. So sending pictures and communicating back and forth is very big. It's a big thing. So a few of these things with the moon expander, something that I do pretty regularly to try to use the largest size screw that I can is tapering the guide pins. And again, you want to make sure not to take in any length, just a tapering. So I'll hit it with a stone wheel, then rubber wheel it. And a lot of times it'll make a huge difference. If you just go on all 4 of them, it'll bring it like that much closer to the pallet. So I probably do this on almost all of them, unless they give me a wide pallet, which doesn't happen too often. So another thing, like we were saying before, is removing some of the pallet. This is just weird to me, but I've done it and it's worked. So you know, this along with the tapering, you can really get, you know, a 10 millimeter screw in where maybe you wouldn't have been able to before. Maybe an 8 would have just fit. So it'll help you maximize the size screw that you're using. Or sometimes if it's super narrow and an 8's not fitting, it'll get an 8 to fit. So again, you know, you want to make sure to leave the struts away from the pallet about 5 millimeters, and then carve no more than 2 millimeters off the pallet is what's recommended. So I'll do, you know, between that and the tapering, you can pretty much get something to fit usually. This is you. Okay, so when placing the TADs, it's recommended for the doctor to do it as you would with a tire lug nut system, where you're going to do, you know, top left, bottom right, bottom left. You want to alternate. You don't want to avoid going like top, top, bottom, bottom, just to prevent any torquing when inserting the appliance. This is you.
Yeah, some of our accounts made that mistake in the beginning, and Dr. Moon talks about that because to try to put them both up top, the screw could rotate on you. So that's problematic, right? All right, so we're going to get into an area a little bit that's really for your doctors, but I think it's important for educationally for us to just be aware of placement of the TADs. You know, we're not in charge of that. We're technicians that are just following the guidelines, but you know, it is super important. So the more information, like Megan was saying, that you get, so we ask for as much information as we possibly can, whether it be photos, x-rays, CBCT scans, all that stuff, because you really need, in order for this to work properly, you need to penetrate both the nasal and the palatal cortical. All right. So the palatal cortical and the nasal cortical bones for proper engagement with the TADs need to be engaged all the way through. So I have a couple slides here. So like an x-ray that we received, and basically in its closest distance, you're seeing between the palatal cortical and the nasal cortical at 3.5 millimeters. And this was going back to what Megan was talking about selecting the proper TAD length. Again, this isn't for you, but it's educational, because you have to think about everything that has to be penetrated. So there's penetration of the housing. So if it's a moon screw, it's 2.5 millimeters of length they're already losing on the TAD length before we even get into the tissue, and then the palatal cortical, then the soft tissue, then the nasal cortical. So that's why sometimes they have to really go with a longer TAD, and why they come in all different lengths. Whereas if you're using the acrylic born TAD expander, you don't have to penetrate the housing. So it does save on some. This is, I think, is really nice. A lot of these scans don't come out as clear like this, but this is really nice. And so this is a really also good one that you can kind of see it, I hope. I know it's hard to see for some of you, but where it penetrated the palatal cortical and then right into the nasal cortical bone. That's ideal. That's what they're shooting for. And that's where the placement comes in. And we, you know, a lot of the questions tonight were all about the placement. This is from this Dr. B, I call him, from Denture. He's really good about sending you slides if you need it and stuff, and helping you with educating, because he really wants to promote it. You know, he really feels strongly about how much it's changing people's lives, and he's really excited about it. It's interesting to listen to him if you haven't already, because I know he's done a lot of cases. I did this in my backyard just to kind of show, and as an example of the difference between it just the screw passing through the palatal cortical. Okay, this is probably in there pretty good, right? But you know that's in there really good. That's not going anywhere. And it's not going to, and this is where it shows you the most, it's not going to tip like that. So in this case, this was a failure. It penetrated the palatal cortical bone, but not the nasal cortical bone. And you can see after expansion what happened. What do you want? I'll leave it up. So did this person get some expansion? Definitely. I can see midline expansion. I see a nice diastema between the centrals. I even see some space there up in nasal cavity, but I'm just thinking it probably would have even been so much more. We have no idea how old this person is really, or anything, male or female, but it would have worked even more effectively. So the doctor considered this a failure because I think they got to the end of the screw and they didn't get as much as they wanted to. But this is a super good slide. Again, I'm willing to share this with anybody. Yeah.
So in a case like that, were you able to complete it with a regular? Oh, sorry. So with a case like that, were you able to complete it with a regular RPE because the suture was split?
That's a really good question. Have you, Megan, had to got someone reuse the screw and redone it with a? Not to do that, yes. Yeah. So the feedback that I've gotten from some of my accounts, it's a really good question, is they've used two. So some of these cases need two expanders and not a conventional. I think once they're set on the TAD assisted expansion, they just kind of stick with that. But certainly, I guess it could, but the process would have to be done like immediate, right? So like we were talking about before, yeah. I guess scanning, I don't want to answer to that because if we haven't done it, and I guess I could see where it'd be problematic because you'd have to digitally remove all that, the other one, and try to drop it in there. And the way Megan was talking too, how precise everything has to be, because if you took it out and waited a couple weeks, that wouldn't work, But I guess it could be done, to answer your question, with probably a conventional expander afterward. But that's a really good question. I guess we could ask some more orthodontists about it, But we've done 2 MSCs in a row.
Yeah, and see, that's I guess. So we've had issues where there's been failures in the screw, and the doctor has felt like, well, we're not going to get the screws in that spot. Like that's the only spot we had to place them.
Yeah.
And once you kill that spot, it's done.
Yeah.
You've lost your opportunity to expand, but you are saying your doctors are able to get a second round of screws.
So
and then do you place them in a different position?
Let me ask you a question. What were the failures on the screw?
Tipping, just like you're talking about.
okay.
So where they just didn't get them in correctly.
Yeah.
And it tipped.
Yeah. So then you kind of answered the question, I think, because then either the TAD was in the wrong spot or it wasn't long enough. So if they were happy with the spot in the CBCT scan, then they have to go to a longer TAD. If they weren't happy, then this one might show it. They might have been picking a spot that was too much distance. It was too thick. They got to get back a little further, but not too far back. It's a sweet spot. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Some of you are shaking your heads about it. You don't want to go too far back, into the soft palate. You don't want to get too far forward because we had some failures where some doctors had it like all the way up in here, and it couldn't penetrate properly. It wasn't getting dual penetration. So it is a science for sure. And I feel like a lot of these CBCT scans you see, they're kind of crappy. They don't come out very clear. So I don't know, because we'll say, oh, we'll read. I'm like, I don't, some of them are real clear. Like I cheated in that. Of the ones I'm showing you are the best ones I've ever seen. That's why I was like, got to show these, because some of the ones they're just not very readable to me. And I think that there's some guesstimating, to be honest. But this one here showing some real clear distances for determining TAD lengths. This one's decent, but it's not as clear as the other ones that you saw earlier. Oh, that's kind of dark. That doesn't come out very well. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. Fees. So this just went up, but you can buy these in bulk if you want to offer them. You have to buy 40 or 50, whatever. And it is a pretty good discounted price, so laboratory commercial price. Same thing, like these just went up. I think they were $135. They just went up again. There are a couple options. I think I wrote it down in my pocket because I just started talking to these people. Some of you might be familiar. There's a company, Insight Dentalogics. Anybody familiar with them? I think they're in California. They sell the components as well. They'll sell the expanders. They'll sell the TADs. Besides Great Lakes. But if you buy them in bulk, you can definitely get a discount. You have to buy at least 10 of the expander. Yeah. Kawaya. Go to his store. They're expensive. $200. But you can work them a little bit. Especially if you're going to buy a bunch, you know? But if you just want to buy one, we can sell you one if you guys want to try it or something like that. You want to reach out to us if you want to check it out. Because we have some and we can get more, but if you use it regularly, you can just go through him and squeeze them a little bit. These are actually relatively inexpensive. You know, the eyelets aren't that expensive. I don't know, like $7 or something, I think, for the eyelets. The pallet screw is more expensive than a typical RPE, but they're not that expensive. So this system really isn't too bad in general. It's just more labor intensive. Okay. I mentioned this earlier. You know, this is the reason why we're doing this. It's a non-surgical procedure. All right. And it opens up a lot of conversations about airway. Dr. Evans went on and on. It was so moving with some of the slides that she was showing about patients that changed their lives. One was a twin brothers, young brothers in their teens. And for whatever reason, genetically, the one got a really narrow palate and the other was like a superior athlete, the brother, you know? And he had, the purple under the eyes. He just had a lot of issues with breathing, sleep apnea. And he went to see her and she seated a TAD supported expander. And then she showed a couple of years later, he actually grew. He was like an 18-year-old. And after the procedure, he actually grew, got taller, and got bigger. And she showed like side by sides with his brother when they were 21 and they were the same size. He was like a little puny guy before. It was like, it brought me to tears, like she like changed this kid's life. And he just, I don't know, it's just doing incredible things with airway now. And like Lance was saying in the beginning, even really young people, she's starting to do them on like 6-year-olds, not so much TAD supported expansion, but airway expanders that are bonded, like from like C to E, that are diagnosed very early with very narrow and very small airways and that have obvious problems. I think she calls it a deciduous airway expander is what she termed it. These are some examples. Again, like I said, the Kawaya screw costs a little bit more to buy. The Tomas screw is not a lot of money, but there's a lot of labor involved. Megan's expensive. These, and this is not necessarily with 3D printed bands. I mean, if you want to go that route, but these are just examples of something that I'm just sharing super openly here of what we would charge. Because I think that's what's awesome about ORG. We really talk and we learn. But again, this is not including any digital services or any 3D printed bands or anything like that. Megan does charge extra for each ring because it's just a lot more work if they wanted 4, and it's just a lot more time of back and forth, path of insertion issues and things like that. The acrylic ones, like I said, you charge whatever you want, but you probably takes you 2 minutes to make that thing, Megan?
Okay, good question.
Okay, so the Thomas ring added, is that per ring?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a big pain in the butt to try to line up the 4. Yeah. All right, so we just wanted to take a few minutes here if you guys had any other questions for us. I'm always available for questions. I've taken calls from a few other labs that are nervous about getting into it. I have no problem talking to you guys and, you know, helping you through it. If you have any questions about anything, I'm available. So here's my information. I also have cards if anyone wants one. Anything else? Okay. Phil, anything else you have to
No.
add?
We'll be around all day. Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Yeah. Where's your card?